The day Tilly Bouchard spilled an entire tray of champagne on the most dangerous man in New Orleans. She wasn't even supposed to be working that shift. She'd been called in last minute. Renee had twisted her ankle, and the Fontaine Grand Hotel needed bodies on the floor for whatever private event was happening in the East Ballroom. Tilly had exactly 45 minutes to change into her uniform, take 2 buses across town, and pretend she hadn't been eating leftover pad thai in her pajamas since noon. She made it in 43. The East Ballroom wasn't just set up for any private event. There were men in suits standing at every door who weren't there to carry hors d'oeuvre. There were no name tags, no company banners, no PowerPoint slides on a projector, just very expensive liquor, very quiet conversations, and the kind of silence that pressed against your eardrums even in a room full of people. Tilly noticed all of this in the first 90 seconds and decided, reasonably, to keep her head down and her tray steady. She managed this for about 11 minutes. The man she collided with wasn't even moving. That was the thing that haunted her later. He was just standing there, perfectly still, drink already in hand, speaking in a low voice to 2 other men who looked like they'd been sculpted from granite. She came around the corner of the bar cart, overcorrected for a woman in a red dress who stepped sideways without warning, and launched an entire tray of full champagne flutes directly into the chest of Raffaele Conti. The glasses didn't all break. One did, hitting the marble floor. The rest just emptied. All over his jacket, all over his shirt, all over what she would later learn was a custom Italian suit that cost more than 3 months of her rent. The entire room went quiet. Not politely quiet, not the quiet of people pretending not to notice. The absolute, airless quiet of 40-something men freezing in place like someone had pressed pause on a remote. Tilly stood there, holding her empty tray, champagne dripping off the edge of it, staring up at a man who was at least 6'2", with dark eyes that could have been kind in another life, but right now were doing something more complicated than anger. He looked at her the way a man looks at something unexpected, not furious, not amused, just calibrating. "I'm so sorry," she said, "because what else do you say? I'm so incredibly, deeply, cosmically sorry." He looked down at his soaked jacket, then back at her. "Cosmically," he repeated. "I panicked," she said. "I don't know why I said that." One of the granite men to his left made a sound that was not quite a laugh and not quite a threat. Raffaele Conti reached into his breast pocket, produced a folded handkerchief and handed it to her. Tilly blinked. That's yours. You seem to need it more than I do." She did not, in fact, need it more than he did. He was the one covered in champagne. But she took it anyway because her hands were shaking slightly and the handkerchief gave them something to do. She blotted the tray. She didn't know why she blotted the tray. The tray was metal. It was fine. "I'll pay for the dry cleaning," she said. "That won't be necessary. I insist I have." She did the math quickly. "I have most of a paycheck coming on Friday." His expression shifted by approximately 2 degrees, which on his face apparently constituted something significant because the granite men exchanged a look she wasn't supposed to see. "Keep the handkerchief," he said. And then he turned back to his conversation, damp jacket and all, like she didn't exist. Tilly retreated to the bar cart, spent 3 minutes reorganizing glasses that were already organized, and told herself the worst was over. She was wrong. The hotel was short-staffed the following week. They always were. And Tilly found herself assigned to the private floor, the 6th floor, the one she'd been vaguely warned about during orientation by a woman named Greta, who worked mornings and had the eyes of someone who'd seen things she wasn't going to talk about. "Just be professional," Greta had said. "Don't ask questions. Don't make eye contact unless spoken to. And for the love of everything, don't be clumsy." Tilly had nodded and not mentioned the incident with the champagne. The 6th floor was where the hotel kept its long-term guests, people who weren't passing through, but weren't exactly residents either. People who paid in arrangements that had nothing to do with the standard booking system. Tilly's job was simple: service the rooms on her cart, replace linens, answer requests, stay invisible. She was invisible for almost an entire morning. Then she knocked on the door of Suite 6018 to replace the coffee service, received no answer, let herself in as instructed, and found Raffaele Conti sitting at a desk in the middle of what appeared to be a very important phone call. He looked up. She looked at him. She took one step backward and caught the back of her heel on the threshold and went down, cart and all, in a spectacular avalanche of coffee cups, sugar packets, and one very unfortunate ceramic creamer shaped like a rooster that had been in the suite's inventory for what looked like decades. It shattered. The rooster shattered. Raffaele Conti said something brief and Italian into his phone and ended the call. He looked at Tilly on the floor, surrounded by ceramic rooster pieces and sugar packets, and said nothing for a long moment. "That creamer was hideous," he finally said. Tilly, from the floor, said, "I'll add it to my tab. You have a tab now. At the rate I'm going, yes." He did something then that she didn't expect. He set down his phone, stood up, and came around the desk to help her up. Not in the way of someone performing politeness, in the way of someone who had actually decided to do it. He offered his hand. She took it. He pulled her to her feet with the kind of effortless ease that made her acutely aware that she was not a small woman, and he had lifted her like it was nothing. "Are you hurt?" he asked. "Just my dignity," she said, which was already on life support after the champagne incident. Something moved across his face. Not quite a smile, more like the ghost of one. "You remember me," he said. "You're very memorable," she said, and then immediately wished she hadn't, because that could mean 100 different things, and at least 40 of them were inappropriate. But he didn't look offended. He looked at her for a moment with that same calibrating expression, like she was a math problem he was doing in his head, and the answer kept coming out differently than expected. "What's your name?" he asked. "Tilly," she said. "Tilly Bouchard." "Raffaele," he said. "I know," she said. She didn't actually. Not the full story. She just knew his name from the room assignment sheet. She would learn the rest later, piece by piece, from the way people moved around him, and the way conversations stopped when he entered rooms, and the way Greta, when Tilly mentioned his name casually over break, put down her coffee cup very slowly and said, "How do you know that name?" But that was later. Right then, in Suite 608, with a shattered rooster on the floor between them, Raffaele Conti picked up one of the pieces and set it on the desk. He didn't throw her out. He didn't call the front desk to complain. He just said, "Get yourself a new cart," and went back to his desk like nothing had happened. Tilly cleaned up the mess. She did not mention the rooster to her supervisor. She wasn't entirely sure why. The 6th floor became her regular assignment. She didn't request it. It just happened. The kind of thing that happens in places like the Fontaine Grande, where certain guests receive certain accommodations without anyone saying it out loud. Raffaele was rarely alone. There was always someone in the hallway, always someone with a phone, always a low murmur of conversations that went quiet when she approached with her cart. She learned quickly not to listen and not to look too hard. She learned the coffee order: black, no sugar, too hot for normal people, and the newspaper preference: 2 specific papers, no tabloids, and the fact that he worked best in silence and kept the curtains half drawn, even in the morning. She learned these things the way you learn anything when you're paying attention without meaning to. What she didn't learn was how to be less herself. She tried. She was genuinely, sincerely trying to be the kind of quiet, invisible service worker this floor required. But she was Tilly Bouchard, who had once accidentally set a smoke alarm off in a library, who had a talent for arriving at exactly the wrong moment, who tripped over her own feet when she was nervous and over other people's feet when she wasn't. She walked into a glass door she forgot was there. Twice. Different days. She knocked a full ice bucket onto the floor of the hallway while one of Raffaele's associates was walking past. A large, serious man named Petter, who looked at the ice cubes around his shoes with an expression Tilly could only describe as existential. "Sorry," she said. Petter looked at her, then at the ice, then back at her. "You do this often?" he asked. "More than I'd like," she admitted. He helped her pick it up, which was not what she'd expected. The thing she noticed, slowly and then all at once, was that none of them, not Petter, not the other men who moved through the 6th floor like furniture that could bench press a car, ever actually did anything about it. They endured her. Some of them, she started to think, maybe even anticipated her arrival with something approaching entertainment. There was one afternoon when she came to replace the minibar items and discovered that someone had moved everything to the second shelf. All of it, precisely at a height where she could reach without stretching. She stood in front of the open minibar for a moment, trying to figure out how to feel about that. Raffaele was in the room. He was reading something. He didn't look up. "The shelf height," she said. "Maintenance adjusted it," he said, still reading. "Did they?" "They said it was a standard accommodation." It was not a standard accommodation. She'd worked 6 other rooms on this floor. The minibars were all at the same height they'd always been. She restocked the minibar. She did not say anything else about it. But when she left, she thought about it for the rest of her shift. And she thought about it on the bus home, and she was still thinking about it when she got to her apartment, and heated up soup and sat at her kitchen table in the particular quiet of a person who has just received kindness in a form they weren't expecting and don't quite know what to do with. She found the envelope on a Thursday. It was tucked under the door of the 6th floor linen closet, which was technically accessible only to staff, and which had her name on it. Not her full name, just Tilly, in handwriting that was precise and unhurried. Inside was a note that said, "The Fontaine's owner is a friend. You won't be reassigned." That was it. No signature, no explanation. Tilly stood in the linen closet for a moment, note in hand, surrounded by folded towels and the faint smell of lavender detergent, and tried to pass what had just happened. She had not known she was about to be reassigned. But Greta pulled her aside an hour later, looking apologetic, to say that management had decided to rotate floor assignments, except that the 6th floor roster was staying as is, and wasn't that lucky, because Tilly had really settled in up there. Really lucky, Tilly agreed. She kept the note in her apron pocket for the rest of the day. When she got home, she put it in the drawer of her nightstand, next to a photo of her mother and a mostly empty tube of hand lotion, and a library card that had expired 2 years ago. She didn't throw it away. October brought a cold snap and a particular guest on the 6th floor named Desmond Frey, who arrived on a Tuesday and made Tilly's skin feel wrong every time he looked at her. He was polished in the way that expensive, dangerous things sometimes are. Everything pressed, everything correct. A smile that showed too many teeth. He was staying in 612, 3 doors down from Raffaele's suite. He spoke to the staff the way people do when they've decided the staff are furniture, except when he spoke to Tilly. And then he looked at her in a way she recognized from 100 other contexts and had spent her whole life deflecting. The 3rd morning, he stopped her cart in the hallway. "Matilda," he said, even though she'd never told him her full name. "Tilly," she said. "Can I help you, Mr. Frey? I'm having a small gathering in my suite tonight. I could use extra service. You can request that through the front desk. I'm requesting it through you." She looked at him steadily. She'd had a lot of practice at steadily. "I'll let the front desk know you're interested in evening service." She pushed her cart forward. He stepped aside, but he was still smiling when she passed him, and she could feel it on the back of her neck all the way down the hall. She told herself it was fine. She told herself she'd handled worse. She had handled worse. She'd grown up in a neighborhood in Metairie where you learned early to read a room and exit gracefully, and never let anyone see that something had gotten to you. But it got to her. That afternoon, she was in the hallway outside Raffaele's suite, when the door opened and he came out and he looked at her face, and he stopped. He was not the kind of man who asked, "Are you okay?" He was, she had learned, the kind of man who observed. He looked at her for a moment, and then he looked down the hallway toward 612. "Has Frey spoken to you?" he asked. Tilly considered deflecting. She was good at deflecting. She'd been deflecting since she was 11 years old. "He stopped my cart this morning," she said instead. Raphael said nothing. His expression didn't change by a single degree, but something in the quality of his stillness shifted. "That won't happen again," he said. "You don't have to." "That won't happen again," he said again, and went back inside and closed the door quietly. Desmond Frey checked out of the Fontaine Grande the next morning, early. She saw his luggage being loaded into a car from the window at the end of the hall. She did not see him again. She wanted to ask. She didn't ask. Some things you understood without asking, and this was one of them. It was Petter who told her, accidentally, on a grey Wednesday afternoon when they were both waiting for the elevator, and he appeared to momentarily forget she was a civilian. "He asked for your file," Petter said, watching the elevator numbers. 3 days after the champagne. Personnel file. "He doesn't do that." The elevator arrived. They both got in. "He does it for security purposes sometimes," Petter continued, apparently talking to the elevator doors now, rather than Tilly. "For threats, not for." He stopped. "Not for what?" Tilly asked. Petter looked at the ceiling. "Not for interest." The elevator reached the 6th floor. The doors opened. Petter walked out. Tilly followed with her cart, and neither of them said anything else, and Tilly stared at the cart handle and thought, "Oh." He started talking to her, not immediately, not all at once, but in pieces, the way a careful person does something they're not entirely sure about, testing the weight of the ice before stepping onto it. He asked her where she was from. She told him Metairie. He nodded like he knew it, which she doubted but didn't press. She asked him, because she couldn't quite help herself, if he'd grown up in New Orleans. He said no. She asked where. He said it didn't matter. She said, "Fair enough," and handed him his coffee. He told her, unprompted on a Thursday, that he'd had a bad morning. Tilly looked up from the linen she was folding. She'd never heard him volunteer information before. In her experience, men like him didn't have bad mornings. They had consequences and negotiations and outcomes. Not mornings. "What kind of bad?" she asked. He seemed slightly surprised she'd asked. "The kind that reminds you of who you used to be before you became what you are." Tilly considered this. "Is who you used to be better or worse than what you are?" He was quiet for a moment. "Simpler," he said finally. "Not better, simpler." She folded the last towel. "I think about that sometimes too. Whether simpler is better or just easier to miss." He looked at her, fully looked at her, the way he hadn't when she was just the woman with the cart, like she was a person he was deciding to see. "You're not what I expected," he said. "I get that a lot," she said. "Usually about 10 seconds before someone underestimates me." Something broke open in his face, not dramatically, but she saw it. A crack in the surface where something warmer lived. "I'm not underestimating you," he said. "No," she agreed. "I don't think you are." The problem arrived in the form of a man named Villanueva, who came on a Friday and brought 3 other men with him who wore their tension like a second suit. Tilly only saw him briefly. She passed the open door of a meeting in the 6th floor conference room and caught a glimpse of a man with silver hair and a smile that didn't match his eyes. She heard the word arrangement and the word guarantee, and then the door swung shut. That evening, she found Raffaele in the hallway, which was unusual. He was always inside, always contained, but there he was, standing at the window at the end of the corridor, looking out at the city lights. She could have walked past. That would have been the professional choice. The smart choice. She stopped next to him. He didn't look at her. He was somewhere else entirely. "It's going to rain," she said. He glanced at the clear sky. Eventually, she amended. The corner of his mouth moved. You're not very good at small talk. I'm great at small talk, she said. I'm just bad at timing. He looked out at the city. He had the look of a man carrying something heavy and doing it alone, because that was the only way he'd ever learned to carry things. She thought about her mother, who'd worked double shifts at a diner in Metairie for 11 years and never complained and never asked anyone for anything, and died of a heart attack at 53, still carrying everything alone. You know, Tilly said. You're allowed to put things down sometimes. He looked at her. Whatever it is, she said, you're allowed to not hold it for 5 minutes. He was quiet for a long moment. The city lights reflected in the window between them, doubling everything. What do you do, he asked, when you can't put it down? I eat something terrible for me and I watch something stupid on television, she said honestly, and I let myself feel bad for exactly 1 hour, and then I go to sleep and I try again in the morning. He stared at her. I know it's not very sophisticated, she said. No, he said slowly, it isn't. A pause, but it might be the most sensible thing anyone has said to me in 6 months. She laughed, a real one surprised out of her. He watched her laugh. He didn't look away. The trouble with Villanueva wasn't over. Tilly didn't know the details. She wasn't supposed to know any details, but the 6th floor had a different temperature to it the following week. The men moved differently. Conversations were shorter. Doors stayed closed longer. Petter looked tired. A man she hadn't seen before appeared in the hallway and stayed there for 2 days. And then one evening, she was coming back from returning the cart to the service elevator when she heard raised voices from the stairwell. Not Raffaella's voice, not anyone she recognized, but the tone was unmistakable. The tone of someone delivering a message that wasn't friendly. She stood in the hallway for a half second. Then she did something that was either very brave or very stupid, and which she would not be able to fully explain later, except to say that it felt like the only reasonable thing. She went to the door of suite 608 and knocked. Hard, 3 times, the way you knock when it's urgent. The door opened. Raffaele was there, jacket off, which meant he'd been in the middle of something. Behind him she could see Petter and another man looking at something on a table. There's someone in the stairwell, she said. On the east side. 2 men. They don't work here. Raffaele looked at her for 1 full second. Then he said something in Italian over his shoulder, and Petter was already moving. She stood in the doorway. Raffaele looked at her, not with the calibrating expression, not with the careful distance. He looked at her the way someone looks at a person who has just done something unexpected and generous and slightly reckless. Come inside, he said. I have a cart to return. Tilly, he said, just her name. But the way he said it made her feel like someone had pressed a warm hand against the middle of her chest. She came inside. The stairwell situation was handled. She never learned how. Petter came back after 20 minutes and said something short to Raffaele, and that was the end of it. She was sitting on the couch with a cup of the coffee she'd made herself in his sweet kitchen, because she'd asked, and he'd said yes, and she figured she was already all the way past the line of professional conduct when Raffaele sat down in the chair across from her. You could have walked past, he said. I know. Why didn't you? She thought about it. Because you moved the minibar shelf, she said, and because you got rid of Frey. And because no one does things like that without wanting something, but you never asked for anything, and I've been trying to figure out what that means for 2 months. He looked at her steadily. It means, he said carefully, like a man measuring every word, that I find you remarkable. Tilly held her coffee cup. She was a 26-year-old woman from Metairie who rode 2 buses to work, and had never had a passport and owned 1 good dress that she wore to funerals and job interviews. She had been told a lot of things about herself over the years, that she was too big and too loud and too much and not enough, and she had believed various amounts of various things at various times. She had not expected to be called remarkable by anyone, let alone this person in this room. "I spilled champagne on you," she said. "You did. I broke a ceramic rooster. It deserved it. I walked into the same glass door twice. 3 times, he said. I watched from the window the 3rd time." She stared at him. "You watched. You recovered very gracefully," he said, and there was something in his voice she hadn't heard before, something soft around the edges, careful and warm. "Raffaele," she said. "Yes. What exactly is happening right now?" He leaned forward, elbows on his knees, and looked at her the way she had been looked at exactly never before in her entire life, like she was the most interesting thing in the room. "I'm not entirely sure," he said, "but I haven't been uncertain about anything in 17 years, and I find I don't mind it." It was Petter who found her the next morning, before her shift started, waiting by the service elevator. He had a look on his face that she could only describe as uncomfortable, the specific discomfort of a large, dangerous man who has been tasked with delivering a warning to someone he has decided he doesn't want to warn. "He has enemies," Petter said. "A lot of enemies." "I know," Tilly said. "People near him have been hurt before. I figured it would be easier for you to transfer floors." Tilly looked at the elevator. She thought about her mother, who'd worked hard and carried everything alone and never asked for anything and still lost. She thought about what Raffaele had said, simpler, not better, and she thought about the note in her nightstand drawer, and the minibar shelf, and the way he said her name. "Petter," she said, "has anyone ever told you that you're not very good at discouraging people?" Petter was quiet for a moment. "The boss is going to be a problem," he said, but he sounded almost resigned, and she thought she heard something like relief under it. "Yeah," she said, pressing the elevator button. "Probably, but I've been handling problems my whole life." The elevator arrived. She got on. Petter stood in the hallway with the expression of a man watching something inevitable happen in real time. She rode up to the 6th floor. She knocked on the door of Suite 608. Raffaele opened it. He'd already made the coffee hers, she noticed, with cream and 2 sugars, exactly how she took it, in the heavy ceramic mug that she'd accidentally told him was her favorite 3 weeks ago, and apparently he had remembered. He held it out to her. She took it. "I'm not going anywhere," she told him. He looked at her for a long moment. Outside the window, New Orleans was waking up in the grey morning light, all fog and iron balconies and the far-off sound of a streetcar. "I know," he said, and stepped back to let her in. And for the first time in a very long time, something that had been braced for impact in Tilly Bouchard's chest slowly, quietly let go.